To begin with, I think I should explain that I was a very shy girl. And I'm not going to cry. And so it was difficult for me, especially with men that were so much bigger than me. And my husband, Connie's dad, had a business in a small town, and I stayed home with Connie, and we lived on a lot that was a corner lot, and so there was a lot of yard work to do, and I grew gladiolas, trained them up to be around a big fence. I had all colors of gladiolas because I loved them so. One day I was out in the yard tending to the yard work, and a man came up and parked and came over to the fence, and he said, is Norman Paul your husband? And I said, yes, he is. He says, I need to leave a message for him. Can I give it to you? And I said, yes. And so he came over then to the gate and opened it and walked in. I didn't think much about it. But he said, I think you better go get a pencil and paper to write it down because I want to be sure he gets the message accurately. So I said, okay. And I went to the house to get the pencil and paper. And when I turned around, he was in the house right behind me. And he grabbed me. And it scared me so bad. I hit him in the stomach to get away. And I yelled back at him, I'm calling the police. And he took off. And I sat down and thought about it. And I thought, I asked for that. I used to wear a halter in shorts to work out in the yard because it was so hot. And I thought, you asked for that. You should dress modestly. And I didn't know about the church then. But from then on, I tried to dress modestly and not, make problems for myself. And yet that incident caused me to be especially scared of men that came to the door. And we lived in a little town called Griswold at that time, and we moved then to Atlantic, and Norman went to work for his dad as an apprentice because the government had a program that they would pay for apprenticeships. And Norman was not happy in the work he was doing. So he worked for his father as an apprentice to learn to be an upholsterer. But they used to get into it and just have fights that were terrible, screaming at each other and so on.
Grandpa and his dad?
Uh-huh. Because Norman felt he knew a better way to do things. And Daddy Paul had his idea. And he would get so mad when Norman was doing truck seats for the state of Iowa, because Norman was doing them with a curvature that fit under your knees. And Daddy Paul said, no, it should be round like a cookie. A cookie, he said, to beat on the thing. Oh, and finally, neither of them could stand each other anymore. So Norman quit, and we were living in a little apartment that we shared with an older lady that rented out part of her home. And she had a big barn behind, and Norman fixed that barn up to be his own upholstery shop. And to begin with, he was going to finish that order for the state trucks. And I kept saying, you can't do this. You cannot go into business against your father in the town that he started out in so many years ago. This is not right." But Norman insisted, and the rats were so bad in that big barn that he'd work a while and then he'd hurry into the house and have to get his nerve up again because they would come right up to him and crawl on his legs and stuff, no matter what he did. So anyway, finally he couldn't stand it anymore, and he went looking and found a place in a little town called Griswold where he could rent a shop, and we bought a little 3-room house that a farmer was selling and had it moved in to a corner lot in Griswold and fixed it up. And we did just fine because Connie was in a baby bed, and so it worked out good. And from then, we moved to Red Oak, where he had more clientele for what he was doing, but he didn't like what he was doing, and so he had a chance to become a car salesman, and he turned out to be one of their best. He sold Chryslers, and Norman always had a way with older women. They just adored him. And he would play up to their adoration of him, a young, handsome man that was paying attention to him. And I didn't care. I knew it was all for the money. It was surprising they didn't figure out it was for the money, but they never seemed to. And so that's where we went from there. And
every Sunday we used to go visit Grandma.
Yes, every Sunday we would go visit Grandma Paul and the Paul family and cook dinner and have a big dinner there. And her back was so bad that she couldn't do a lot in the kitchen. And so sometimes we would stay after the dinner. Norman would go back to where we were living to do his business, and we would stay there so I could do extra things for her, ironing and stuff she couldn't do. And the Mormon missionaries came to her house when I was there, and she let them in, and I never would have. 2 big young men that you were alone in the house. I never would have done it. And so I got up and left the room, and she hadn't done her lunch dishes, so I thought I'll go do her dishes and listen to see what they got up their sleeve. And I was making so much noise with the water and the dishes, I couldn't hear good. So I quit doing that and snuck into the dining room where I could hear better. And they were talking to her about a kind of cement that the Indians made in Central America that was far superior to our cement of today. And I thought, oh, come on now. That is not possible. So I walked in there and I said, I don't know what you guys are selling, but this is ridiculous, what you just said about cement. And they said, well, I'm sorry you feel that way, but this is the proof. And they began to show me pictures up close of cement that never crumbled. And I thought to myself, well, old girl, maybe if you sit down and shut up, you might learn something. Because I thought I knew, and I didn't know.
You liked archaeology, even?
Yes, I loved archaeology, and I had never read anything about cement that was superior. And why would it be superior? And so I sat down and listened to them, which wasn't the whole thing about cement. It was all about the gospel. And that really fascinated me. And so they gave Mama Joe a Book of Mormon and got her to commit to read it, and they would come back the following week. And so I was staying with her that week to help with a huge ironing that had piled up.
Yeah, so you just happened to be there, right?
Yes.
It was just all a coincidence that you were there.
A very
And did they give
big
it to her or did they sell
coincidence.
it?
Pardon?
Did they give it to her or did they sell it to her?
They gave it to her. There was no money involved. So after they left, she and I talked a little bit, and then we went, I went to do her ironing and stuff. And I would ask her then, have you started that book? No, she says, I'm not really interested. And I said, well, do you care if I read a little? And when you're ready to read, I'll give it to you. She says, no, that's fine. In fact, you read it and tell me what it's about. She said. So I took the book and started reading it. And I couldn't put it down. I'd always loved stories about Indians anyway. And this was just fascinating to me. And I thought, how could I love history so and not have come across this before? Because I thought in school that was my favorite subject, was history, and second geography, and never had I heard this. And so I would keep offering to give her back the book. I'd say, oh, Grandma, it says, and I'd tell her stuff. She said, they don't know what they're talking about. And so I just kept reading the book, and they did come back like they said they would. And they asked her, had you read it? She says, no, I'm really not interested. But she says, my Jeannie has been reading it. And so they turned to me and they said, what do you think? And I said, well, I've got a whole bunch of questions, if you don't mind. And so I started shooting questions at them, and they had an answer for every single thing that I could think of. And then I asked, is there more? Yes, they said there's more. And they gave me then the Pearly Great Price. And
Jenna wants to say something.
What year was this?
I would say Connie was probably 3 years old. That's what
49. 49?
that would be my guess. She might have been
Might
not
have been
quite
two.
3,
Yeah.
Yeah, so 48, 49.
but somewhere along in there.
Now, had you read the whole book before the missionaries came?
Yes,
That week, the next week.
yes.
In
The
one
Book of
week, you read
Mormon,
the whole Book of Mormon in 1 week?
yes. I couldn't put it down. I had gone there to help her with her ironing, and it bothered me so that I was neglecting that ironing. And so I fixed a little thing with a coat hanger so it could stand up, and I could read and iron at the same time.
Did you feel the spirit when you read it?
Yes,
But you didn't know what.
I didn't know what it was. I only knew that it was answering questions that I had had for years. Questions that I had asked so many different preachers. And they would look at me like, she's a strange one, but they didn't have answers for me. And so I'd discuss it with them. Could it be this or could it be that? And they'd all just shake their head and give up. You know, they didn't know what I was aiming for.
Were there areas of the Book of Mormon or parts that stood out to you? Do you remember that first time you read it? Anything that really stuck out?
Yes, there were several. The fact that God had a body, and Jesus too. Because I had always been taught that we were, I guess, like a mist or something nebulous. And so anyway, they had answers to my questions. And it just fascinated me because their answers made sense. And they would refer me to other reading in the Bible, which just pleased me no end, and it all connected. Because up until then, many parts of the Bible I couldn't understand. I would try to pick it apart and reason with myself, but it just would not come together. So anyway, they came back, and when they found out I had read, they said, "Do you have any questions?" I said, "Oh boy, do I." So I started shooting my questions at them, and they had answers. And so I got a little suspicious. I said, "What do you base that on? How do you know that answer?" And they said, "Well, it's in this book," and they get the Book of Mormon, and the Pearl of Great Price, and the Doctrine and Covenants. Whole new things to me. But yet they would constantly back it up with the Bible, from the Old Testament and the New Testament. So I was just thrilled. I went home and took all those books with me after I'd finished her ironing and stuff. We would take the bus back, Connie and I. Or we would try to time it to be ready when Norman would come on Sunday again. Because he liked to go see his mom every Sunday. And so, anyway, I had fascinating reading to do. But again, it would evolve with more questions. And they then made a date, an appointment, to come see me in Red Oak, which was where we were living at that time. And I was tickled to death because then they could answer my questions and show me where they got the proof. In the meantime, my dad was selling Mormon feed, not the same Mormon as the church's name, feed to farmers. And his route included Red Oak, which was the little town where we were living, and Norman was selling cars. And quite often my folks Mom and Dad both would come. Mom would come with him when he had his route to do in Red Oak. And she'd stay with me while Dad worked, and then I'd feed him and they'd go on back home. So they came, and they hadn't been there, I would say not even a half an hour, when the missionaries came, who had made arrangements with me that when they could, they had to get permission. They would come to Red Oak and answer any questions I might have. And what you know, they showed up. And Mom had only been there a little while. Dad was still there even. He hadn't left to go do his stuff. And I can wait. When Dad found out, I was so tickled. I said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you're here. I want you to meet these young men." And I introduced them. And my dad said, "And tell me the name of your church." And they did. And he said, "You get out of here, and you get out of here now." I said, "Dad, why? What is the big deal? If you'll sit down and listen, you'll find out some good information. It's true, all that we know about Jesus." My dad was a member of the board of the Church of Christ in Atlantic, and had been for many years. And he had some really queer ideas about Mormons. I don't know where he got them. But anyway, Dad said, "I will not sit here and listen. If they don't leave, we are leaving right now." And I said to the guys, I said, "I'm very sorry. Phone me and we'll work out something." And so the missionaries left, and I had all those questions I wanted to ask them about the Book of Mormon. I was just so disappointed. And so after they left, I tried to reason with Dad. I said, "What is this that you are so adamant and against them? What are you thinking about?" And so he said, "I don't even want to tell you." the terrible things that those men do. He said, they're awful. And you will not have them anymore in your house. I said, Dad, I'm a grown woman, I'm married. I think I should decide who comes to my house and who doesn't. And he said, well, if you have them anymore, we will not be coming. I said, oh, this is ridiculous. And then Mom piped in. Mom said, do you know they don't even believe in Jesus? I said, oh, yes, they do. I said, almost every page of the Book of Mormon has something in it about Jesus. And so I opened the book. I said, here, look at this. She said, no. She would not even touch that book. She was scared to take that book from my hand and look at the printed page. It was just utterly ridiculous. So anyway, Mom and Dad left, but they didn't leave in good spirits at all. Dad was very angry with me. And I found out later, the missionaries had looked up on the church records, and there was one older lady living in the town of Red Oak, but was not active. I suppose there was nothing there for her to be active with. And I had not met her, but they looked her up to ask if they could stay until the next bus came so they could get back to Atlantic that way, the way they planned. So it turned out okay, but I was left with all those questions. And so what they did, they stayed overnight with that older lady, and the next morning they showed up. And of course, Mom and Dad were gone by then. I was so tickled. They came in, and I began shooting questions at them. And quite often they would take the Bible, either the Old or the New Testament, and help me see the answer. And I had not seen it before. I had not connected with it before. So that was a very fascinating time for me.
How did my dad feel about it?
Well, I didn't tell him that the missionaries had come because I knew he would think ill of me if I invited young men into the house and I was there alone. I knew it would cause a big catastrophe, so I didn't mention it to him. But he did see me reading the Book of Mormon, because I read it and reread it. And so he asked, and then I told him, and he said, don't have him back anymore. This is not right. You don't know what you're doing. So anyway, that was kind of took care of that. But I had the Pearl of Great Price and the Doctrine and Covenants too that I didn't tell him about. I thought, boy, if he gets that mad over the Book of Mormon, I don't think I want to mention any more. I guess it was sneaky of me, but I knew that he was a jealous person. And I thought, I'm not going to give him any more reason to be angry.
So from that point to then further interaction with the church, how did that?
Was the church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints even then?
Pardon?
Was the church called the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?
Yes.
Know what is
Then
that?
why did
And
They
that's
think it
what I
was it.
said to my mother when she said they don't even believe in Jesus.
Yeah.
I said, Mother, their name is, and I explained it to her, and I said almost every page of this book says something about Jesus. Here, look, see what it says. And she backed off and said, no, I'm not touching that. She says, you just don't know. We're older. We know.
So how did you get your questions answered? Was that when you wrote to the ladies? in Omaha?
Yeah, what I remembered was the missionaries had mentioned that in Council Bluffs, there is a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And it's very active and, thriving.
And that was how far away?
Council Bluffs was 50 miles, I'd say.
But in those days, that might have, well, been 500.
And
We
I
didn't go
They have the I-80.
anywhere.
and I didn't drive then. Norman didn't feel that women had enough sense to be able to drive safely.
Later, you taught yourself how to drive, didn't you?
Yes.
She sneaked the car.
It's,
And had
You
me
are
sit my
sneaky.
brother.
Grandma was a sneaky person.
Also righteous.
We should watch her.
because we lived catty corner from a high school, and they had a big track. And I thought, if I can get that car over to that track, I can practice backing up and parking and all those kinds of things
Going around
safer.
curves.
And Norman always slept late on Sunday mornings. He would usually sleep till noon or so. And so I would get Connie up and feed her. And Dudley was a little baby, and I would get him fed and to sleep, and then I'd say, now, you watch your brother, and if he chokes or something, you come outside and wave, and I'll come right home, because I won't be far.
Do you remember that?
So that's,
How old was Mom?
I must have been 6 or 7.
oh, are you sure?
Well, my brother was born when I was 5.5.
Yes. And I was thinking it was about then.
Oh, so he was a new baby.
But anyway, so that was how I taught myself to drive, is I would, first of all, I'd watch where he parked and how he parked it, so I could get it back in the same location.
You were sneaky. Wow.
And so I would, and I had such a devil of a time getting it shifted into reverse that it just didn't happen.
What kind of a car was
It's
it?
like
A
the
Dodge.
three on the tree or
No, it was on the floor. And you made an H, because I watched him. And he made an H when he drove. And,
So how did we get to Council Bluffs to go to church sometimes? By bus?
yes,
And that wasn't very often, was it?
no, about once a year.
And then
So-
so for 1948 or so, that's when you first read the Book of Mormon. How long did it take until you were able to get baptized?
What year were
I
you
was
baptized?
baptized in 58.
Because I was baptized in 59.
Yes.
So
So
10
did you
years
did you
later.
keep track of all the missionaries that kind of helped you and taught you along the way?
Well, in a way, there weren't that many.
Well, that's. I was wondering how many were there that taught you.
Well, let me explain that the missionaries had talked about an active church with a bishop in Council Bluffs. I began to have a whole list of questions, important questions. And so I wrote them all down, and I addressed the envelope to the Bishop of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Council Bluffs, Iowa. And it got delivered. And so the bishop read my letter with all my questions, and he took it into the gospel doctrine discussion class and said, here is what I would like you to do. Take this sister's questions and as a class answer them and write her a letter. And so that's what they did. And two sisters in that class became very close friends. We wrote almost every week, back and forth. And I kept having questions. And so every Sunday they'd give out a new assignment to answer this lady's questions.
It took a whole class to answer them.
So Grandma, you had never met these sisters.
No,
You were good friends through your letters.
yes,
Pen
yeah.
pals.
Did you have a telephone? Or not so much?
That would have been long distance too.
Yeah,
Long
and
distance, huh?
I wouldn't be able to phone because Norman paid the bills. I didn't want to upset him.
Right.
Long distance was expensive.
Very
Like even when we first got married, I could never call home to talk to mom because it was too
expensive when we first got married.
And then it just took, so how many years did you go like that with just writing letters and not really being able to go to church? Because you weren't really able to go to church for years probably, right?
Yeah, right.
For years and years.
Oh,
Number one.
I don't even know. I have to get out.
probably 10
Probably you
years.
moved to Florida, and then you were able
Yes,
to.
I would guess it was a good 10 years.
But you got baptized in Florida?
Right?
No, you were baptized before you moved to Florida?
Then she did it, right?
Grandma, didn't you go to a state
Yeah.
conference? Was that the first meeting that you went to? What was it? Didn't you travel to a state conference or travel to
Was it the dedication of the Mormon Bridge?
It was the dedication of the Mormon Bridge, and President McKay was going to be there to do the dedication. I found in my local paper. And so I made up my mind I was going to see a prophet. I knew I couldn't talk to him, but I wanted to see if he looked different or something. And so there was the problem of the money for the bus ticket. And I talked to Norman about it, quite frankly. I wasn't trying to keep it hidden. And I explained why I wanted to go. And he said, well, how are you going to pay for the bus ticket? And I said, well, I thought I could use some of the grocery money because we won't be here for a day or two to eat groceries. So he says, okay, if you can manage on that, that's fine. He didn't mean to be mean. He was just not understanding.
Well, there wasn't any money to spare. There was
So,
no.
Grandma, was there ever an instant that hit you that you knew the church was true? Because what drove
Oh, yes.
you to just keep at it and not give up?
And at what point was that?
It was very early in reading the Book of Mormon. I knew it was true. I knew inside. And so that's why I couldn't quit. I had to finish reading, and I had to get more reading to do. And everything I read all made sense, and it all fit together.
So when you prayed about it, didn't you come to that verse in Moroni where you're prompted to pray and you're promised?
Yes, yes. And so I followed that exactly. And in my prayers that night, and I always prayed on my knees, I had asked it, and nothing happened. And so I thought, well, maybe I have to ask more than once. And so I climbed in bed and I laid there thinking about it. And I was thinking, I wonder if that Book of Mormon is true. And it came to me like there were 200 people in the room all shouting, yes, it's true. And so I couldn't sleep for a long time. And I got back on my knees to thank God and to ask for guidance to know more. Because it was the true church, there had to be more than just what little bit I knew.
Well, and my dad was so unhappy about it, and your parents were.
Yes.
Were they threatening to take me away and
Well, they
disown you?
threatened, when Dad threw the missionaries out of the house and don't you ever come back. He turned to me and he said, I mean this seriously. You have anything to do with those people and you are no longer a daughter of mine. He said, they're evil people. Evil. He said, you have no idea how evil they are. I found out later, my dad and mom were avid readers. And they especially liked Zane Grey. And they read everything he ever wrote. Well, Zane Grey fictitiously made up terrible stories about Mormons in his book.
They were kind of Old West books.
Yeah.
Yes,
Like
they
the
were all
Southwest.
Old West. And all that he wrote was fictitious. And when I found that, and I took it to Mom and Dad to show them, oh, they didn't like it at all. They said, whoever wrote this is wrong. Zane Grey wrote from his heart, and he researched everything he wrote. Every word he wrote is true.
Good old Zane Grey.
So it didn't work.
Well, Grandma, isn't it so neat for you to now be almost 85? You're coming up on your 85th
Yes.
birthday here. And to see all of us sitting around you. And
It
how
is.
many, we hear in conference talks stories of the ripple effect and one person and you think, oh, it's just one person, and then they'll tell the story about how now that person had this kids and these many
Yes.
grandkids, and it multiplies by the hundreds.
Yes.
And I just think it's so neat to have you here now and to be able for you to be able to see all of this. For
It's
you to
neat
see
for
it.
me.
Yeah. You're
Yeah.
one inspirational lady.
And because you're also active, you all have your own testimony that it's true. And you're all living as you should. Knock on wood. We don't get anybody on drugs or alcohol or hooked on nicotine. We're living the best we can. We're not perfect, but we're living the very best that we can.